Hello, check out these ruins. Quite beautiful, I'd say. They are prehistoric towers built with dry stone technique, meaning without adding mortar to glue the stones together, and sometimes with fitted odd shaped stones. Although the fitting is not enough to be called polygonal and the stones are not big enough to be properly megalithic, these old skyscrapers are impressive, getting to be 20 meters tall, with several levels, with the particularity of having the stairway built within the wall, which is not an obvious building choice. Not to be called a one-off case, thousands of these towers were built and used in prehistory. And whilst their usage or meaning is not totally clear, what makes up for the bigger mystery is their location of the buildings, that can only be found in two places. One is in Scotland, up in the northern top of Europe, and the other is in Sardinia, the Mediterranean island. Two locations that, especially way back then, did not seem to have much in common, except for these twin towers. To make this more interesting, not really, or to try and drive home the point that these two constructions are oddly similar, in each section I will let you guess which of the twin towers' locations are being shown, Scotland or Sardinia. Try and add up how many you got correctly, and be impressed by how similar the twin towers are. In Scotland, the towers are called Broch and said to have been built in the first millennium BC or in the Iron Age. In total, there are around 500 of those buildings left spread onto the highlands, with the best preserved ones to be found in the islands of Orkney or Skye. In Sardinia, in the Mediterranean, the towers are called Nuraghe, and up to 10,000 of those, a massive number, were built there, mostly during the second millennium BC or the Bronze Age, significantly earlier than the Scottish towers, or at least they say. There is a lot of land between Scotland and Sardinia, so we would expect there were other examples of these twin towers along the way. But no, these buildings are exclusive to these two extremes of Europe. A round tower of stone is arguably not a very distinctive structure. Rock is a basic building material, and the circular wall is a naturally strong, in a way that is still today the preferred shape for deposits, from grain to oil. However, if these towers were such a common and easy option, why can't we find similar prehistoric circular towers anywhere between Scotland and Sardinia? When it comes to the dolmens, a type of megalithic construction that are found all around the world, literally from Korea to France and India, the coincidence of construction is discarded by academics for being a very basic shape that anyone would invent, with just a couple of standing stones with a slab for a ceiling. However, the exact opposite argument is used by the same people to discard the relationship between the Broch and the Nuraghe, the multi-storied circular towers that, for some unclear reason, only two, as far as we know, unrelated megalithic cultures, the early Scots and the primitive Sardinians, decided to build in the thousands, ensuring it was not just a fluke. The structural similarity goes beyond the cylinder shape, that per se is a basic format that can be found in other ancient sites. Both the Broch and the Nuraghe have a trait that is almost unheard of. The internal staircase is embedded inside the walls. Whilst the round tower is a predictable shape, The same vulgarity cannot be assumed about the placing of the stairs within the wall. That is both a brilliant and complex solution. That would make sense if it had remained unique to just one land or culture, but not twice unique in two European extremes. Example: in Ireland there are several cases of round stone forts. They are old, circular, made with dry stone and built by the Celtic peoples. However, as expected, the Irish circular enclosures have the stairs built outside of the walls, not inside them. Placing the stairs inside the wall takes advantage of the large width of the walls and frees up space inside the tower. On the other hand, it is not so easy to build, requiring the walls to be extra wide and solid. For not being an obvious building solution, it makes up for a mysterious coincidence in these twin towers. The twin tower walls are not polygonal and not quite megalithic even, but are on their way, being made with dry stone technique, that is, without mortar or any type of glue sticking the stones together. It is somewhat a brave decision to build high towers with this type of masonry. Dry stone could be seen as a primitive approach to building polygonal walls, as it uses most of the same principles, with the interlocking shapes keeping the stones together and gravity to ensure stability. But then, making dry stone walls that go up several stories tall, that's an idea that should not survive for long. The quality of the stonework in terms of fitting and size is better in Sardinia, with many nuraghes featuring large stones that could not be carried by a single man, whilst the Brochs tend to use smaller stones with less dressed fitting. Anyway, in both cases, the still standing structure after all this time, 4 or 5 millennia have passed, is a testament to the skill of the builders. Like with most Cyclopean or polygonal walls, both the Broch and the Nuraghe are the older construction standing around, older than everything else that has a ceiling, not only just close by, but also further away. The Nuraghe in Sardinia are said to be older than any ruins in mainland Italy, which does not seem to make sense. The earlier development should occur in the mainland, and then be transported into the more isolated and backwards islands. The only logical explanation for the construction in the islands being older and more sophisticated than what we can find in the mainland is that in the mainland there was less security and the invaders made more damage. Meaning, there was a time before the construction of the Broch or the Nuraghe that similar buildings were being made all around mainland Europe, but those are lost to time and disasters. Thus, what we can see now are the last and isolated remnants of a larger culture. Another explanation for these buildings being the oldest constructions around is that they do not use mortar, and that technique, the dry stone, made them harder to build but also stronger in the longer run, resisting to rain, earthquakes and other accidents. Maybe, once upon a time, all of Europe, especially Sardinia and Scotland, were covered with buildings, some made with brick and mortar and other with dry stone, like the Brochs and the Nuraghes. Then, time took care of dismantling all of those constructions, except for the more protected. The ones in islands less exposed to human disasters like invasions, and also the ones with better construction technique, thus better suited to resist natural disasters. This is not such a big maybe, so much so we can still see that there are full villages around the Broch and the Nuraghe made with short-lived constructions that are no longer standing. According to the mainstream, there are two possible usages for any old building. Either it is defensive, military, or else it is a tomb, religious. It is as saying ruins were either built to prevent someone from being killed or to honor the unprevented killings. So, unsurprisingly, both the Brochs of Scotland and the Nuraghe of Sardinia have been placed in the first group and are said to be castles because they look sturdy and also no dead bodies were found inside. But in reality, these are not good structures for defense, being not big enough to protect a single village and for having only a small door. It would be just too easy to trap the defenders inside and set them on fire. Despite the lack of direct evidence for the usage of these towers, the large number of buildings gives a decent clue for their purpose. Sure, they projected power, but more in a symbolic way than in practical terms. They are for show off. It's the big house in a clan settlement, where the family could gather for celebrations and also to visually impress the clans in the nearby hills. Also, not a coincidence, both the Broch and the Nuraghe cultures have been terminated by the Romans, who took considerably longer to arrive into Scotland than into Sardinia. The Romans are also the first sources to mention the occupiers of these towers, but this is not as significant as it might seem, since in most of Western Europe the Romans were the ones to introduce writing, and thus Latin makes up basically the oldest text sources everywhere. In conquering Western Europe, the Romans were overriding the Celtic peoples, or Gauls as the Romans would call them, almost everywhere, but not in Sardinia, nor in Scotland, because the Broch and the Nuraghe builders are, in my view, pre-Celtic. See, these Celts or Gauls were, like the Romans later on, an indo-european invader that had replaced indigenous populations or cultures all across Western Europe, except for the most extreme bits, including Lusitania in the north of Portugal, Scotland and probably Sardinia. However, for the lack of written references beyond what the Romans would later on say about the Gauls, we don't know enough about the Celts nor how they interacted with the people living in those places before them. There's this question named the Pictish problem that refers to the absence of sources, even DNA, to explain the origin of the early peoples inhabiting Scotland, the Picts. Myth says the Picts were originally Scythians, nomads from the Asian steppes, but that would be mostly another way to say barbarians or unknown. One thing that is quite clear is that the Picts are pre-Celtic and are part of the now mostly lost inhabitants of Old Europe, from before the indo-european invasions, such as the Romans, the Goths or the Celts. For the Nuragic people in Sardinia, them being Indo-European or Old European is not so clear. The Sardinians are said to be parts of the Celtic expansion and even a major player in the Bronze Age collapse. But the evidence for that is scarce at best, with some contradictions like the earlier Sardinian buildings predating the arrival of the Indo-Europeans to mainland Europe. For the purpose of the Twin Towers, let's say their origin is not Indo-European and were adapted by the Celtic settlers later on. In Sardinia, several metal statues have been found inside the Nuraghes, showing off a particular look, featuring fighters with horn helmets. Nowadays, we are prompt to think of Vikings when horn helmets are in play. But that's a wrong artistic depiction created by the likes of Wagner or Asterix. In reality, horn helmets were not used by the Vikings, nor the Gauls, nor other Indo-Europeans. They tend to predate all that. Horn helmets were popular in Scandinavia, in the early Bronze Age, way before the Vikings, and the horns can be found in many notably pre-Celtic artworks in northeast Iberia, also dating to the very early days of the Bronze Age. This is a rabbit hole for another video or more, but suffice to say, bronze helmets with horns like those found inside the Nuraghe in Sardinia are a sign of an older Europe, predating the Celtics or other Indo-European invasions. Now, this is not about the Twin Towers of Scotland and Sardinia, but will help us get a fuller picture for them. In Sardinia, there are some other ancient constructions that are as captivating as the towers are. Those are the sacred wells, the tombs of giants, and, although less impressive, there are also some carved caves for houses or burial grounds called Domus de Janas. And for this, it's the name that is interesting. The word Janas is used also in Portugal when referring to very ancient ruins, and that same word translates to fairy in the Basque language, which is interesting. Considering Basque is an odd language, older than all the Indo-European languages now used in the continent. So, the Nuraghic people used a Basque word for their fairy houses, making that culture pre-Indo-European, likewise the Picts, that are ethnically pre-Indo-European. There was something going on in old Europe, linking all those regions together. Could it be that it's all related? The Broch and the Nuraghe have one single origin? I'd say yes. In my view, there was a pre-Celtic old European culture that covered the whole continent, from the north extreme in the Shetland Islands to the East Mediterranean. And these links are still visible in curious connections or coincidences, like the Basque word Janas for fairy being used in Sardinia. And as far as this video goes, those twin towers with the stairs built inside their walls. They are also part of the old European culture. But I even think it goes beyond Scotland or Sardinia or the Basques to include the fancy polygonal walls we can see in Italy or Greece and beyond. Despite the evidence, such as the internal stairways, seeing that these twin towers are related is an unconventional idea, because the buildings in Sardinia and Scotland lasted well after the invasion by the Celts and other Indo-European peoples, hiding their origin. Today, the European culture is crystallized around the identities of indo-European invaders, being them the Celts, the Romans, or the Germans. This indo-European layer is placed on top of an older European culture that, despite having many names like Pelasgian or Picts or Lusitanian, seems to me one single culture. And this older culture, the Old European, is responsible for the polygonal or Cyclopean buildings we can see around the Mediterranean. As we'll see in the last stand of Lusitania, the topic for the next video. Until then, see you around.